So the next thing that we're going to use is PyCharm, which is the IDE that I use, and an IDE is an integrated development environment. And the reason that it's really important what IDE you use is because there can be a lot of different tools that kind of help make it easier to do development. And this one is called PyCharm. And right off the bat, we're seeing one of the benefits of using a good IDE. So because I'm checking out an existing code base, there's already a bunch of stuff that's already been done here. And this first question it's asking is, do I want to create a new virtual environment? Because I've created, I basically have a bunch of requirement files in here already. It's able to set up everything we need to run our code. So virtual environment is like with Python. When you install Python, you're going to have like your main install, which is going to be in like your program files or in your the main installation. But the reason you want to have virtual environments is because as you're doing different projects have different requirements. You might need different libraries or different versions of those libraries, and sometimes those things can conflict. So having virtual environments basically is like a sandbox by itself. So when I'm working on even when I'm working on different branches, I can be working on different branches that have different virtual environments, and they won't necessarily have conflicting requirements. So it's a really good way to kind of sandbox the different projects you're working on. So what this is asking right here is, do I want to create a new virtual environment? And this is going to set up the virtual environment in this folder .venv. It's going to use this installation of Python, which is in users, Brian Seel, Python, Python 3.9, Python.exe. And it's going to use all the requirements that are specified here in this requirements.txt file. Just to show what this requirements.txt file is, this is also where using Git is beneficial, because if 6 months down the line, I need to make a fix to something related to this commit. I can do that pretty easily and be able to replicate what the status of my branch was at that point, because I'm pegging to all of these the versions of these requirements. So even though a lot of these libraries will come out with new versions in the next 6 months, I'll be able to check this specific commit back out, make another virtual environment that replicates exactly what I was working with at this point, and then I can potentially make any bug fixes. So that becomes really important if you're trying to support, like, you have a version 1.4 and then you're also working on like version 2.0, but you still need to support 1.4 for 2 years or something. But you don't want to hold back your 2.0 version. That's where using requirements files and using Git and using virtual environments can be really helpful. So just kind of point out a few things that make this a little bit cool. Like down here at the bottom, we have a terminal. And this terminal will actually be using the virtual environment that we use. If we put anything in our code, any to-dos, like do a comment hashtag to-do, it'll show those down here, so that can help us keep track of things that need to happen. If there's any problems with your code, those will pop up down here in this section. Like we can see, it says that all these things aren't installed because it is still going through the installation process, which we can see if we pop this up here. And like here's setup, which is I generate this into a wheel. So this like once I generate the wheel, this is how somebody would install this into one of their virtual environments. So I'm going to create a new file here. So this is going to go into my source directory. So I'm going to call this XML sanitization. And all right, and this is another thing that it does nicely. It asks, you want to add this to Git? Yes, I do. So we can see, like we can see down here, we're working XML standardization branch. So if I wanted to do anything with Git, I could do that down here. But it's added this into Git right now. So I'm just going to kind of start with doing it in this format. So this is a very much a half solution right now, but it kind of adds a few things that I wanted to talk about. So to start with, I'd like to show what the XML file actually looks like that we're going to be working with. These are my test files because I've written some tests for some of the other code using these files. But this kind of gives an example of what we're working with. So these are crash files that the city gets, and this is a sanitized version of the crash file. It's basically just an XML file. And the things that we want to sanitize are some of the personally identifiable information, which is, I think we have people's first names, we have people's last names, and there's also this narrative where an officer can write about what happened here. So obviously these test files don't have real data in them, but we still want to we want to be able to take the real data that the police department would get and sanitize it so that we can use it, because there are certain laws around what can happen with some of these crash files. So like the city can't actually get access to them, but we could get access to sanitized version. This is just kind of like a first stab at this, and it's a pretty bad stab. But the places that you'll have first names and last names in there are in the owner, driver, passenger, and non-motorist fields. So what we're going to do here is do a for loop. We're going to go through and find anything that has .xml at the end, and we're going to open it, read it into this variable name, and then loop through each one of these. We're going to grab the narrative and then basically use regular expressions to replace this stuff. So Python does have some really good XML libraries, but it really felt like overkill to use some of the libraries to edit this stuff, just because we're basically just replacing these tags with empty tags. So anytime we see a last name or first name, just blank them out. The other thing that we're going to need to do is replace any references to the owners or to people's names in the narrative. So we're basically going to look for any of these fields that have a last name, and then take that value and replace it. The details of that aren't super important. But the big part of what we're going to talk about is like how am I using these tools to kind of go through the process. So the actual project I'm working on isn't as important as like how I'm going through it. So there's a few issues. So we have our problems tab open down here at the bottom. One of the first things we see is this line has squiggles under it, and this is using your IDE to kind of see what's going on. So we can hover over that, and we can see it says PEP 8 error 303, too many blank lines. So PEP 8 is like the seminal way that you're supposed to format Python code. So it has all sorts of seemingly asinine rules about how you're supposed to structure code, but when you start following these rules, you start to notice that your code has the same structure. It's also sometimes known as like a code smell. If you look at some people's code, you'll see some that just looks right, like it looks professional, and like it's hard to put your finger on exactly what that is, but sometimes it's these things. It's like these code smells that you have this kind of structure that you're following these rules on standardizing your code, and so using those rules can be good because if you're working in a large group of developers, if everybody is using their own coding style, it can just get really messy. And so if you go in, you write some code, and then somebody else comes in and writes some other stuff, they might change their style back to theirs, and then you write some stuff and you write it back to yours. And it can just make your code end up looking really messy. So having a certain set of rules that everybody follows just makes it easier when you're dealing with large groups. So one of the rules is don't have more than one blank line in between code inside of a function or inside of a code block. So we did that. This other one, this is more important. It's saying that this shadows the built-in name type. And that's because type is actually a reserved word in Python. So using that as a variable name, while it will work, is really bad practice, because that's how you can get some of those really nasty bugs where you expect that you are calling type to do what it's supposed to do, which is to show you what a variable type is. But it's actually this, it's actually referencing one of these strings in here. So let's call this person. Okay. We have. I'm going to leave some of these other ones for us to show in these next steps. And the first thing that I'm going to show is a tool called Pilot, and that's kind of what PyCharm was just showing, which is it's called a linter, and the linter basically enforces all of those PEP8 rules. So if you're a large development team and you want to make sure that before you commit your code in, that it's following all of the rules that you as a development team have agreed to, you can run Pilot, or you can run another tool called Flake8, and basically it'll tell you like, hey, like you did this, or like here's a list of things that you did wrong, and you can go in and fix them before you commit your code. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to first there's my virtual environment. So I'm going to activate my virtual environment in here. This is the console in PyCharm. And if anything I'm saying isn't clear, feel free to just jump in and interrupt me. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we just activated that virtual environment that PyCharm created when we jumped into this session. And so now, anytime that I do Python anything, or if I do pip or anything, it's going to be using that virtual environment that we use. So we're going to be using all the libraries and all the dependencies that were set up when we first started. So I'm going to do Pilot, and I don't care about most of my stuff. I'm just going to run it on this file.
And Pilot is a function that's specific to PyCharm.
No, most of the things that we're going to talk about today are actually Python tools, but
Okay.
PyCharm just brings them together really well.
Okay.
So PyLint is the linter that makes a list of all the things that you've done wrong in your code that don't follow the rules. So like this is that list for this set of code. So first thing we can see is on line 15, trailing new lines, and that's because PEP 8 says that a Python file should have one new line at the end and only one new line, and that's because if you don't have a new line and you add new code to the end of your file, when you commit that in, it's going to say, because you added a new line to the last line of code, it's going to think that you changed that last line of code as well as adding whatever else that you did. So this just makes it cleaner. It makes your commits a little bit cleaner. But you don't need more than one, so only have one. So we're going to take those extra ones off. It's also calling out that I have this to-do. Like, before I commit my code in, I shouldn't have any to-dos in there. Like, you should, if you have a to-do before you commit, that should be made into a ticket, or like put it onto your to-do list. Don't leave that in the code. So we're going to take this out. It's also saying you're missing a doc string. And so doc strings is like if you run help on a Python module, that'll give you some documentation on what that module is for, what that function is for, what that class is for. So it's always very good practice to put in doc strings, because like even if you're not running help, when I open up this file, like if all I see is just this code, I don't know what it's doing. So this kind of forces me to document some of my stuff. So I did this PII from acres. All right. And then this is one that I put in there on purpose. Implicit string concatenation found in lists. So while PyLint is technically doing, it's looking at your code format and code readability and everything, you can also catch some nasty bugs. And when I first did this, I didn't do this on purpose. I actually missed this comma right here. And while this looks normal, what you can see happen is, let's just do this. So the way Python handles lists is if you don't have a comma, it'll just concatenate strings like this. So what I would have thought that I had 4 elements in this list, but instead I only had 3. And so PyLint actually caught that. And when I was actually developing this, it actually caught this for me, which, I might have, I would have probably caught that at some point. But how long would it have taken me to realize that I wasn't checking for passenger non-motorist or something like that? Like, it definitely saved me some time there. So we're going to go ahead and put a comma right there. And run PyLint on this again. Says your code has been rated 10 out of 10. So we're good to go. All right. Let's see. So there's.
What's the command to run PyLint?
To run PyLint, I just ran PyLint space and then the file name.
Okay.
I could also run it on an entire directory. So if I wanted to run it on all of my source directory, I can do this. And so PyLint is a Python. But some of this is my requirements or my dependencies aren't quite set up properly for some of my other code. I'm not sure why it didn't do that properly, but yeah, good questions. The next thing that we're going to look at is called MyPy. We're going to do basically the same thing. And what MyPy does is kind of add typing to Python. So like my background, I have a lot of background with C++, where variables always have types. Like if you can't just make a variable and be like, I don't care what type it is. Like it is what it is. But with Python, you can do that, and it's known as duck typing, which is the idea that if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, then it's a duck. So with my and unfortunately that can cause that's really nice for flexibility, but it can also cause issues where in one function you're treating a variable as one thing, but then you write another function and you use it a little bit differently, and that's where you can kind of run into some of these really nasty bugs. It can be a real pain in the neck writing in C++ and like having to worry about what type you have, or like, are you dealing with an integer, like how many bytes does your integer have and all that, which is where Python can be really nice, but Python can also bite you in the butt because it's too flexible. So, this seems like a lot right here. I feel like it didn't bring in all my requirements. I'm not sure why. So I'm going to reinstall these requirements. That's all I'm doing. I'm using pip here, and I'm just installing from that requirements file. Let me see if that helps. There's an issue in here that I'm looking for us to use, but I'm not sure why. Catching all these things. Okay. So I'm going to ignore some of these because they're in some of the other code and they're not actually an issue. Like some of these are calling out that some of these libraries don't have typing set up, which we just ignore. But the one that I wanted to look at was this one. No overload variant of find all matches argument string and text IO. Which seems like, what does that mean, right? Right. So it's like, let's look at line 9, and it's saying no variant of find all, which is right here, matches argument type string and text IO. So I can see right here, this is a string. And this right here, I believe is saying that okay, so like I hover over this, I'm using PyCharm to kind of show this. It's saying that fscont is a text IO. So what do we expect? We like this, and again, I can just hover over this, and I can see what find all expects. And so we see it is expecting a pattern right here, and it's expecting a string. And so this pattern is that first one. That's the narrative, regex narrative part. And the second part is supposed to be a string. So why is fscont not being a string? So this is another bug in this code where up here we are opening this, and that's returning basically like a file handle. Where what we really want to do is read in that file, because this is that XML file that we were using earlier. And so what we really want to do is basically do that, right? We don't just want to open the file. We want to read the file. So if we run this again, we're still going to get a bunch of errors from the rest of my code. But we are no longer going to get... We're no longer getting that issue about find all. So that was another bug. And while I'm doing this, I'm also going to switch this into a context manager. We're going to make that fs, and we're going to name this XML contents equals fs.read. So basically we did the same thing that we just did, except using a context manager like that, which is the with statement, that will automatically close the file. So if you end up not closing your files, if you're doing a lot of these operations, you can end up with basically a memory leak or leaking a lot of these file handles, which it generally isn't a big deal if you have like a very quick script, but can be a much bigger deal if you're running like a long running thing or you're opening hundreds of files or something like that. So it's a really good practice to do this. But we also just renamed that variable. So I can use one of the other cool things in here and refactor all my variable names, because I have fscont here, here, and here, and here, and here, and here. And so I'm going to change that to XML contents. Because I just made that, and boom, it changed all of those. So that is a cool way is when you're refactoring code to make changes pretty quickly. And I know this is a lot of content, and I hope this isn't way too much. But this is kind of this is why I was trying to find a good way to present this stuff without going too overboard. So I apologize way too much.
I'll work it out in post.
Fix it in post. Mm-hmm. I'm happy if you have any questions afterwards. Figuring this stuff out. I'm happy to talk more. So the next thing that we're going to use is we're going to write some tests. And when especially when we're doing something like this, where we basically need to make sure that this is sanitizing the data properly, because this can cause legal issues if data is being transferred between departments where it shouldn't be. So I'm going to create a test file. I'm just going to call this test XML sanitation. And so how do we test this code? And so one of the really good things to do is to break things into functions to make them easier to test. So we could do like def sanitization. Right. And let's say that we, as opposed to just using wherever we are, let's have it give us a path. You can see that it's giving us these squiggly lines. It's saying that we need to have 2 blank lines ahead of a function. We do that. And we can join this, and then whatever, we include our imports. And then whatever path we end up passing in, it'll look for anything with an XML file in there, and bit process all of the XML that we have. We can also see which happened this turned gray, and that's because this variable isn't being used. So that lets me know that I haven't really finished this code, and I have a variable that I probably expected to be using but wasn't actually using. If I was to run PyLint again, it would tell me that I need to have a doc string in this method as well. But let's go back over to here. I'm going to write my test. going to import I'm going to bring in the code that I just wrote. So like we could be able to do XML standardization, and then this is that method that we just wrote. Sorry. So at this point, all it would be doing is just running that and looking for errors, essentially. I'm going to kind of jump ahead. Like a good cooking show, I did some of this preparation. So here's the code that I wrote. This is the XML standardization. I actually broke it into a sanitized XML and a sanitized XML file so that we can basically pass the path and have it either be a file or a directory. So if it's a file, then it's just going to process the one. If it's directory, it's going to go through and test them all. I also fixed up some of the logic down here, kind of fleshed it out. This stuff is less important for what we're actually demonstrating here. I also have my tests. And so because I have the two functions, I wrote two different tests for this. One that checks with just one file and uses some of these test files we have. And the other one basically goes to this entire directory that I have that has a bunch of different XML files. I'm going to run PyTest on this. I'm going to run that. Well, let's run it on S. This should run. Yeah, that's right. I also need to bring over other file. And I'm doing a lot of blowing through this because there's already a lot of content. Let's try. Not sure. So this is making me think that SQL Alchemy is installed here. Not sure what's going on. So I'm just going to install why. Oh, unless if it's using the wrong PyTest. Let's try this. I think this is how it is. That's what it is. So it's because I didn't install my dev requirement file. So when I ran PyTest, it was using the Python install, the system installed Python, as opposed to the one in my virtual environment, because there was no PyTest in there. And that's one of the things that can be kind of a hang up is understanding paths like that. I'm not gonna go into all that. Whole other can of worms. Give this a second.
I hear that. Sometimes it's not that it's not that the question is wrong, it's that you're asking the wrong question. You gotta clarify that with the machine.
I mean, yes. and like that's the kind of thing that like it makes sense once you understand what's happening. Like you ran PyTest, and you because of the way your environment was set up, it just assumed that you meant the system-wide PyTest, and so like that's the kind of thing that somebody who hadn't been using PyTest for a while or may not be as seasoned with Python might take them at half day to figure out or longer. But these are some of the things that once you've been doing Python for a while, just start to click. And like that's the difference between being like a junior developer and a senior developer. Like during when we were talking before that last article, I said that a lot of what I do is Googling. Like I know how to Google well, but there are some of these things that I've seen this before, so I don't have to Google for that. But there's a reason that I wrote this code ahead of time, and it's because there was a lot of Googling involved with this. Okay, so let's run this again, and I believe this will work this time. I'm calling my shot here. There we go. All right. Import XML sanitization. Okay, so I'm still complaining about that. I think this might be because of the way when I was developing this, the way I was running the tests, which was using Cox, which is going to be the next step that I'm going to show. Because like basically I was using it as a wheel. So what I'm going to do.
What's a wheel?
A wheel is a way to package Python code really cleanly. And I'm not going to talk too much about that because there's already way too much content for your article. But basically, like it's like anytime you install Python code, like if you pip install something, you're basically downloading a wheel from the internet and installing it into your virtual environment. So I've already done that. I believe this is going to work. Why is this not working? I'm going to do import traffic stat. See what's going on, because okay, so this is telling me that that my wheel is working, and I can look at okay. And again, this is just something because I've done this enough. I kind of know what's going on here, and it's because this init file basically sets up the namespace. Again, this is outside the scope of what we're going to talk about here. I'd say I didn't have to do this in my other project. I was doing this before. So let's install this. I believe it should work now. There's all sorts of issues that you deal with around namespaces and what here? What is going on here? Okay, so it is in there. So I should be able to do from graphic stat import XML sanitization. Okay. So what? Oh. Okay. I must have used a different name. So there we go. On my shot, and I'm making stupid mistakes of using the wrong name. All right, let's try this one more time. Might need to reinstall this wheel, I think. Need to reinstall. Okay. Invalid argument. Right. Did I not copy and paste this code? We're going to look at the trace back. So I'm going to pop over here just because we're getting a little bit long. This is basically the same code. This is just my normal development environment, where we're going to jump to the step of using tox. And what tox does is basically brings together all the things that we've done so far. So I'm kind of skipping over that issue because I'm running out of time a little bit. But tox basically allows us to set up the virtual environment that we had. Lets us run the linter. Lets us run MyPy. There's this other tool called Bandit, which looks for security issues, which I don't know. I've never really seen value in it, but I leave it in there, so I don't know. There's another one that does once we have the testing working, that'll actually do coverage reports. So like making sure that the amount of testing that you're testing all of your code. So if you add new code, this is basically saying fail if there's under 91% test coverage, because I already have 91% right now. And so if you add new code, it's going to fail unless you add the new tests that cover that. So I'm going to run this. And so this is setting up my virtual environment, and it's making it, it's not even using the one that PyCharm used. It's going to use the one, it's going to set up a new one. And we're going to run our tests, and we have, in this particular case, we only have 60% test coverage because we're just running the one test. But this one passed, and because of, actually look in my test directory, and I can see the file that was generated. And we can see the last name is empty, the first name is empty. In my test, I kind of glossed over this part, but in the test, we're using data file we're using. It's that one. I'm not opening it with PyCharm just because Internet Explorer shows these files a little bit better.
I think that might be the first time I've ever heard that the Internet Explorer is doing something better than.
It is the one thing that I use Internet Explorer, and like not even Edge, we're talking Internet Explorer. But like this is my test file where we have narrative. We have this string last name, and so basically what I'm looking for in this test is to make sure that it replaces that last name with the sanitized version of that last name. So if this narrative said, John Smith was involved in a crash, this would instead say John Owner was in a crash. And I think that the next step in this is to also to check for the first names as well. Like the big things is, making sure that the narrative doesn't have any PII in there, making sure that all the first names and last names are taken out of there. And we like this is essentially what that test is doing. We're asserting that all of the first name fields are empty. We're asserting that all the last name fields are empty, and we're asserting that the last name is not in that narrative. And there's still a few more things I need to do to make this a little bit more robust. But look, this is the general process that I go through when I'm writing code. At this point, I now have code that is it has a standardized look and feel. I've looked for bugs related to typing. Like I've also put in some of my type hints in here. Like you can see some of these that kind of helps with some of the documentation of, like when I'm working with an API, knowing what the API looked like. Like earlier when we were using the we were looking at the find all, and I wanted to know like what is find all expecting, like what types. That was using some of these little type hints, and so those are some of the little things that make it easier to understand like what am I supposed to be passing to this. We also have we have testing in here, so I have some confidence that we are removing first names and last names and sanitizing that narrative field, and I was able to do that all with talks. And one of the really great things, kind of bring this back to GitHub, is that I can then I can set up a GitHub action using this file, where every time that I commit my code into GitHub, it's going to install, or it's going to run talks. And so before I ever commit my code, I can get a green check mark that, not only is this working on my box, but it's also being checked in somewhere else. A new virtual machine is being created, and all these steps, the pilot, MyPy, testing, like all these things are being run on GitHub with a clean version of this code, and it's working there too. So that is the full way that I do my development.